Loni Anderson. Her bitter divorce from Burt Reynolds made headlines right around the world, and now in an Australian exclusive, Loni opens up to Ange Bishop about her career and her famous former husband.
At 80 years old, Loni Anderson is finally ready to speak her truth. For decades, she stayed mostly silent about the painful chapters of her life. But in a recent interview, she named the one Hollywood star she says truly ruined everything. Who was it? And why did she wait so long to say his name? Join us as we uncover the untold story behind the heartbreak, the fame, and the moment Loni Anderson finally let it all out. The rise of a bombshell. Loni Anderson was born on August 5, 1945, in St. Paul, Minnesota. She grew up in a typical Midwestern home, far away from the lights and noise of Hollywood. Her father, Clayton Carl Andy Anderson, was a chemist, and her mother, Maxine Hazel, was a model. Even though her background seemed ordinary, Loni always had dreams that stretched beyond her small-town life. From a young age, she showed interest in performing. She loved movies, stage performances, and anything that involved storytelling or expressing herself through acting. Loni wasn't just another pretty face, though she definitely stood out. She was crowned Miss Roseville in a local beauty pageant during her teenage years, which helped boost her confidence and encouraged her to explore public life more seriously. Loni stayed connected to her roots, but never let go of her bigger dreams. She went on to attend the University of Minnesota, where she studied art. During college, she didn't just focus on academics. She also participated in local theater productions. These early performances helped her build experience and refine her acting skills. Even then, she was determined to make it in the entertainment world, though she understood that it wouldn't be easy. After finishing college, Loni decided to try her luck in Hollywood. But like many new faces arriving in Los Angeles, she quickly realized that breaking into the film and television industry was tougher than expected. The competition was fierce, and opportunities for women, especially those who looked a certain way, often came with strings attached. Throughout the early 1970s, Loni appeared in small television roles. She had guest spots on popular shows like SWAT, Policewoman, The Bob Newhart Show, and Barnaby Jones. These roles were usually short and often relied heavily on her looks rather than her talent. She was frequently cast as the attractive secretary, the seductive neighbor, or the eye-catching bystander, characters that didn't leave much room for depth or development. Even though these roles kept her on screen, they didn't give her the kind of career she had hoped for. Hollywood at the time had a habit of placing beautiful women in boxes, and Loni found herself constantly fighting against being typecast. She wanted to be taken seriously, but it was hard to move past the blonde bombshell image that casting directors had pinned on her. Still, she didn't give up. Loni kept working, kept showing up, and kept proving that she was more than a pretty face. She had a sharp wit, a strong work ethic, and the determination to wait for the right role, the one that would let her truly shine. That role finally came in 1978 when she was cast as Jennifer Marlowe on the CBS sitcom WKRP in Cincinnati. Jennifer was the smart, confident, and stunning receptionist at a struggling radio station. The role was originally written as a typical dumb blonde character, but Loni convinced the producers to change the character into something much more intelligent and layered. She wanted to play a woman who was beautiful but also calm, wise, and in control. They agreed. The show quickly gained popularity, and Loni became a household name almost overnight. Her performance was sharp and funny, but also subtle and elegant. Jennifer wasn't just a side character. She became one of the most memorable parts of the series. Audiences loved that she was never the punchline. She was often the smartest person in the room, despite being surrounded by a group of goofy and sometimes clueless co-workers. Loni's ability to balance her glamorous look with strong comedic timing made her stand out. At a time when most TV shows didn't give female characters much power, Jennifer Marlowe was different. She controlled the room with charm and confidence. Loni helped break a stereotype while still embracing the qualities that had often been used against her. Even after WKRP in Cincinnati ended in 1982, Loni remained a popular figure in television. But that role would always be her most iconic. It was the turning point in her career. It gave her the credibility and recognition she had worked so hard to earn. From a small-town girl in Minnesota to one of the most recognizable faces on TV, Loni Anderson's journey was filled with challenges, but she faced each one with determination and grace. Her early career was not easy, and she had to push through stereotypes and limited roles before finally getting the part that let her be everything she truly was. Next up, we meet the man who would become part of her most public and most dramatic chapter, Burt Reynolds, Hollywood's tough guy. Burt Reynolds was born on February 11, 1936 in Lansing, Michigan, but he grew up in Riviera Beach, Florida. His full name was Burton Leon Reynolds, Jr. His father was a police chief, and growing up, Burt was very active and athletic. He wasn't focused on acting in his early years. Instead, his first big dream was to play professional football. Burt attended Florida State University on a football scholarship. He played as a halfback and was considered a promising young athlete. Many believed he had what it took to make it into the pros. But during one game, he suffered a serious knee injury. That injury would change his life completely. It ended his football career and left him searching for something new to focus on. While recovering, Burt started taking classes at Palm Beach Junior College. There, a teacher noticed his talent and encouraged him to try acting. Burt gave it a shot and found that he had a natural presence on stage. He went on to study acting more seriously and began performing in small theater productions. His early performances led to some attention, and eventually he moved into television. In the 1950s and 60s, Burt got his start with small roles in TV shows. One of his biggest early breaks came with the show Gunsmoke. He joined the cast in the late 1960s playing the character Quint Asper. This role helped him build a fan base and gave him valuable experience on screen. He also appeared in shows like Hawk and Dan August. These early roles usually had him playing rugged, tough characters, which would soon become his trademark. Burt Reynolds became a major star in the 1970s. One of his most important films was Deliverance. In it, he played a strong and fearless man on a dangerous canoe trip through the wilderness. The movie was serious and intense and showed that Burt could handle dramatic roles, not just action or lighthearted parts. Deliverance became a hit, and it helped him get noticed by top directors and producers in Hollywood. Just a few years later, Burt took on the role that would make him a legend, Beau Bandit Darville in Smokey and the Bandit. The film was a huge box office success. It was funny, exciting, and full of action. Burt's charm and energy were the main reasons people loved the movie. He wore his signature mustache, drove fast cars, and smiled his way through every scene. He made it all look easy. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Burt Reynolds was one of the most famous actors in the world. He was often listed as the top box office star for several years in a row. But it wasn't just about his good looks or the action-packed roles. Burt had something special. He was macho and masculine, but he also didn't take himself too seriously. He had a playful side that made people feel like he was approachable. Whether he was in a movie, on a talk show, or posing for a magazine, he always had a smile and a joke ready. One moment that showed this side of him clearly was when he posed nude for Cosmopolitan magazine in 1972. The photo shoot was playful and bold. It broke norms at the time, and it made headlines across the country. It proved that Burt understood how to work the spotlight, and he wasn't afraid to have fun with his image. Even though many saw him as the ultimate tough guy, there was always a softer, more emotional side to him. He could be sensitive and reflective in interviews, especially when talking about love, relationships, and regret. That balance between strength and vulnerability made him even more appealing to fans. Before Burt Reynolds met Loni Anderson, his love life was already a topic in the tabloids. He had many relationships over the years, but two women stood out, Dinah Shore and Sally Field. His relationship with Dinah Shore began in the early 1970s. She was a famous singer and talk show host, and she was 20 years older than Burt. At the time, their age difference caused a lot of public interest, but Burt always spoke highly of her. He said she made him feel loved and respected, and their relationship lasted several years. He later described her as one of the most important people in his life. Later, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, Burt was involved with actress Sally Field. This was another well-known Hollywood romance. Fans loved seeing the two of them together, especially because they co-starred in a few films like Smokey and the bandit in the end. Burt said many times that Sally was the love of his life. However, their relationship didn't last. They had differences in how they viewed their futures, and eventually they went their separate ways. Throughout these relationships, Burt often expressed a desire for a stable family life. He talked about wanting children and a long-term partner, but at the same time, he admitted to being afraid of getting too emotionally close. He had a history of pulling away when things got serious. That inner conflict, wanting love but fearing it, followed him throughout much of his life. By the time he met Loni Anderson in the early 1980s, Burt was already a huge star, a symbol, and a man who had been through several serious relationships. He was looking for something lasting, but he also carried a lot of emotional baggage. What happened next would become one of the most famous and most dramatic love stories in Hollywood. And that's where things start heating up, because Loni and Burt together were anything but boring. Loni meets Burt. Loni Anderson and Burt Reynolds first crossed paths in the Hollywood social scene during the late 1970s. Both were already well known by that time. Burt was one of the biggest movie stars in the world, and Loni had become a television favorite thanks to her role on WKRP in Cincinnati. They had seen each other at various industry parties and award shows. Like many stars of the era, they were often in the same rooms, dressed in their best, surrounded by cameras, and used to the attention. Their early meetings were polite and friendly. Loni later said she admired Burt's work and found him funny and charming. Burt also admitted to being intrigued by Loni. He thought she was beautiful, of course, but he also liked her calm presence and sense of humor. Still, for a while, they remained acquaintances, occasionally chatting at events, but not moving beyond that. Everything changed in 1981 when they officially started dating. By then, Burt was coming off a few high-profile breakups, and Loni had recently gone through her own divorce. They were both single, famous, and perhaps looking for something more meaningful. When they finally gave their relationship a chance, it didn't take long for sparks to fly. They had instant chemistry, and before long, they were one of Hollywood's most talked-about couples. When Loni and Burt got together, it didn't take long for the public to notice. In fact, their relationship became a media sensation almost overnight. They were both incredibly attractive, famous, and at the height of their careers. Together, they made headlines without even trying. The press quickly labeled them Hollywood's golden couple, and fans loved seeing them side by side. Their red carpet appearances were always a hit. They looked glamorous and comfortable in front of the cameras. Whether they were attending movie premieres, charity events, or award shows, the flashes of photographers followed them everywhere. Magazines featured their relationship often, showing happy photos of them smiling, holding hands, or vacationing together. They appeared on the covers of People, TV Guide, and Us Weekly. Their relationship became a kind of fantasy. Two stars who seemed to have found love in the spotlight. People were fascinated not just because they were beautiful and famous, but because their relationship looked so perfect. They appeared to balance each other well. Burt had a bold, confident personality, while Loni was graceful, composed, and elegant. In public, they seemed to truly enjoy each other's company. Interviews with the couple often included laughter, compliments, and affectionate moments. It was a relationship the public rooted for. But of course, what people saw on the surface was only part of the story. In private, Loni and Burt had a dynamic relationship filled with warmth and excitement, but also challenges. At first, they seemed to truly connect. They shared a similar sense of humor, a deep love for acting, and a desire to find real emotional connection despite years of heartbreak in the industry. Both had been through difficult relationships in the past, and they each carried their own personal pain. Still, in those early years, it looked like they had found something real. Friends close to the couple said there was a strong emotional bond. They spent holidays together, took trips, and even started talking about family plans. It felt like a new chapter for both of them, a second chance at love and long-term happiness. Their relationship was exciting, romantic, and full of promise. The world watched closely, hoping they would last. For a while, it seemed like they really might. But behind the fame, the parties, and the photo ops, deeper problems were beginning to form. Problems that would eventually shake their relationship to its core. A picture-perfect marriage. On April 29, 1988, Burt Reynolds and Loni Anderson tied the knot in what quickly became one of the most talked-about celebrity weddings of the decade. The ceremony was held at Burt's Florida estate, known as Valhalla, and it was nothing short of extravagant. Over 400 guests attended, including stars from across Hollywood. The guest list featured A-list actors, directors, and longtime friends of the couple, making it a true star-studded event. Loni wore a white lace dress and looked radiant, while Burt, always stylish, chose a tuxedo that matched his confident personality. The wedding was planned to reflect both their tastes, romantic, luxurious, and very public. Photographers captured every moment, and magazines published full spreads of the big day. At the time, it seemed like a fairy tale coming to life. Fans and the media called it a perfect Hollywood love story, and the couple didn't hesitate to share their joy with the world. They had waited several years before making it official, and many believed that their marriage would last. To the public, it looked like two glamorous stars had finally found their forever match. In the first years of their marriage, Burt and Loni seemed to settle into family life. One of their most meaningful decisions came shortly after their wedding, when they adopted a son, Quentin Anderson Reynolds. Becoming parents gave their marriage a new layer of purpose, and they often spoke lovingly about their family in interviews. They described Quentin as the center of their world, and both appeared devoted to raising him in a supportive home. They also tried working together on screen. Burt was still involved in film and television, and Loni occasionally appeared in projects alongside him. One example was their work on the made-for-TV movie Evening Shade, where Burt played the lead. Though Loni wasn't a regular on that show, their combined fame meant that people stayed interested in whatever they were doing, together or apart. The couple gave multiple joint interviews and appeared on talk shows where they talked openly about their life together. They were often charming and funny, finishing each other's sentences and sharing inside jokes. To the audience watching from home, everything seemed fine. They presented themselves as loving parents and partners who had found the right balance between career and family. But behind closed doors, things were not as smooth as they seemed. As time passed, problems started to show in their marriage. The first few years were filled with joy, but cracks slowly began to form. One of the biggest issues was personality differences. Burt had always been larger than life, outspoken, bold, and used to being the center of attention. Loni, in contrast, was more reserved and private. Their different ways of handling pressure and public attention sometimes led to arguments. Another strain on their relationship was Burt's declining career. By the early 1990s, he was no longer the box office draw he once was. Several of his films failed to do well, and his finances were also beginning to suffer. The stress of fading fame weighed heavily on him, and it affected his mood and behavior at home. According to later interviews, Burt became more irritable and difficult to live with. Loni tried to be supportive, but it wasn't easy. The downward spiral begins. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Burt Reynolds was no longer the top box office draw he once was. His film choices weren't landing with audiences the way they had in the past, and he struggled to stay relevant in a changing Hollywood. He had invested in multiple businesses, including a dinner theater, a restaurant chain, and a production company, but many of them failed. He also owned a large estate in Florida that was expensive to maintain. Financial pressure began building up fast. Burt tried to stay busy with work, taking roles in television and lower-budget films. He even earned praise for some of them, like his role in the TV series Evening Shade, for which he won an Emmy in 1991. But behind the scenes, he was dealing with serious money problems. In 1996, just a couple of years after the divorce, he would eventually declare bankruptcy. But the warning signs were already there during his final years with Loni. Loni, meanwhile, was trying to find her own place again in the industry. She had been widely known for her beauty and comedic timing on WKRP in Cincinnati. But after marrying Burt, many people saw her more as a celebrity wife than an independent actress. She wanted to take back control of her career and identity. She pursued TV movies and occasional guest roles, but it wasn't easy to step out of Burt's shadow. At home, the financial tension added to the emotional strain. As bills mounted and projects failed, both Burt and Loni felt the pressure. Arguments became more frequent. The couple, once so publicly affectionate, began spending less and less time together in private. By 1993, Rumors of trouble in their marriage were everywhere. The tabloids were filled with speculation about cheating, addiction, and even physical fights. Both Burt and Loni were frequent targets of gossip magazines, and as things got worse, they both began talking to the press. What followed was a public meltdown that played out in front of millions. In June 1993, Burt shocked everyone by announcing their separation through a statement released by his publicist. Just days later, People magazine ran a story with Burt admitting that the marriage had ended, and he hinted that Loni was partly to blame. He accused her of being a poor mother and suggested that their relationship had become cold. He even said they hadn't been physically intimate in years. It was a bold and hurtful claim. Loni fired back with her own interviews. She told People magazine that Burt had emotionally abused her, cheated on her with other women, and had a problem with prescription drugs. She said he could be controlling and verbally cruel and that she had stayed in the marriage for the sake of their adopted son, Quentin. Her version of events painted a much darker picture than what fans had seen for years. The most shocking part of their split was how open they both were about it. Instead of keeping things private, they spoke publicly and often, giving their sides of the story in dueling interviews. It became clear that this wasn't going to be a quiet breakup. It was going to be a war. Allegations of infidelity, drug use, and even physical violence were discussed in headlines. Both sides denied certain claims while standing firm on others. Fans were left to wonder who was telling the truth. What had started as a glamorous love story was now a full-blown scandal. Burt filed for divorce in 1993, and what followed was a long and bitter legal battle. The press quickly labeled it the divorce from hell, and for good reason. Every detail was dragged into the spotlight and neither side backed down. One of the biggest points of conflict was custody of their son, Quentin. Both Loni and Burt claimed to be the better parent. Burt, despite his earlier claims about Loni's parenting, said he wanted to remain deeply involved in his son's life. Loni insisted she had always been the primary caregiver. The legal battle over Quentin was emotionally intense and very public, with both parents using the media to support their cases. The divorce also involved huge financial claims. Loni demanded alimony and child support, while Burt argued that he was broke. He said his financial troubles were worse than people realized, and that he could no longer afford the lifestyle they had shared. In 1994, the court finalized the divorce, awarding Loni custody of Quentin and ordering Burt to pay support. But even after the ruling, the fighting continued for years. At one point, Burt fell behind on payments, and Loni had to take legal action again. He also sued her for defamation, claiming that her public statements had damaged his reputation. The lawsuits, interviews, and court filings dragged on, making their divorce one of the messiest in Hollywood history. What made it even harder for fans to watch was how different this was from the couple they had admired just a few years earlier. Burt and Loni had once seemed like the perfect pair. Now they were saying cruel things about each other in front of the world. Scars and survival. After the divorce from Loni Anderson, Burt Reynolds struggled both emotionally and financially. Though he tried to stay strong in the public eye, he didn't hide the fact that the end of the marriage had left him deeply hurt. Over the years, in various interviews, Burt made several emotional comments about Loni. In one 2015 interview, more than 20 years after their split, he said, "I still loved her." It was clear that despite everything that had happened, he had never fully gotten over her. He expressed regret not just about how things ended, but about the way he handled it. Burt admitted that he had made mistakes and that his pride and anger had taken over during the divorce. He also suggested that their marriage could have worked if they'd both been better at communicating and managing the pressures of fame. Professionally, things continued to be tough for him. He filed for bankruptcy in 1996, revealing that his fortune had been drained by poor investments, overspending, and legal fees. He sold many of his belongings, including his beloved Florida estate. Though he never returned to the top of the box office, he kept working steadily in film and television, doing guest roles in smaller projects. In 1997, he received an Oscar nomination for his role in Boogie Nights, which briefly revived his career and gave him a much-needed boost. Still, the damage from the divorce lingered. He often seemed sad when talking about Loni, even years later. While he didn't speak of her with the same harshness he once did, There was a tone of loss and longing when her name came up. Loni Anderson also had to rebuild her life after the public collapse of her marriage. In the years that followed the divorce, she focused on healing, raising her son, and reclaiming her identity. In 1995, she released a memoir titled My Life in High Heels, where she told her side of the story. The book included stories from her childhood, her rise in Hollywood, and of course, her difficult marriage to Burt. It was honest but not cruel. Loni spoke her truth while keeping the tone reflective rather than bitter. She continued to act, mostly in TV movies and guest roles, and appeared in talk shows and charity events. Though she never returned to the peak of her WKRP and Cincinnati fame, she stayed active and visible in the industry. Over time, she became known not just for her beauty, but for her resilience. She also became an advocate for women's health and aging gracefully. Loni remarried in 2008 to musician Bob Flick, one of the founding members of the folk group The Brothers Four. She spoke warmly about finding peace and happiness later in life. She embraced aging with confidence and often said that life had taught her to focus on what really matters: family, health, and honesty. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss more stories from behind the scenes of Hollywood's biggest names.